this week I have Lee Nguyen joining from, I forget your company name, Lee.
It's not Veterans United. I want to make that clear, just because everyone thinks it's Veterans United, um, or people just call it VA Lending, is
Okay,
what people end up. But it's Veterans Lending Group.
perfect.
Mhm.
So I invited you on because I wanted to talk about, veterans lending and some of the misconceptions that are out there. And, just I guess to get started, what would you say is the most important thing that people know about lending when they're working with a veteran?
I'd say the biggest thing is that I think a lot of people assume that we, as veterans, we know our own benefits, and we know them very well, or we know them how it works and things like that, more so than what the real estate industry. And the truth of the matter is that 99% of the time that's not the case. I didn't really learn about, as a veteran myself, I didn't really learn about my benefits until much later, and some of the information I was taught was not even enough to work off of. Sure, the most thing that's well known is definitely the education benefit for sure,
Mhm.
and that's mainly typically the main reason some people join the military,
Yeah.
because they get this amazing education benefit. But there's a lot more than that. And what's nice is, about when it comes to education benefit, it's relatively seamless. You just get with the college that accepts it, and they just kind of take care of it for you, which is really nice. But there's some other benefits with being a veteran, whether you're active duty or not, especially when it comes to the VA home loan. It's very elusive, very ambiguous, and there's not a lot of people that in especially in the military that understand how the VA home loan works. Even if they bought their home using the VA home loan, some of them don't even know what they did. And I was one of those people when I first bought my house, when I first transferred with the military to Washington State and bought my first place. I didn't realize I was using my VA home until like 2 years later.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and, and that's because I wanted to learn more about real estate, and then like, stumbled upon the VA home loan side and realized, oh, I was using my VA home loan. So yeah. And then when I finally, and had it not been for that, probably the next time I've heard about my would have heard about my VA home loan would have been 4 years later when I was getting out. And I went through this transition course that I had to go through. And the last
Mhm.
day of that week, we talked about 2 or 3 hours about, VA benefits, and even the VA home loan is not talked about well often. It's not very well understood, and the information they present is very confusing. And most of the presenters don't even know how to explain it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest assumption that people make, is that we understand our benefits when we really don't.
Yeah. And it kind of coming off of that, the big thing that I think about with regard to the misunderstanding is, a lot of people hear, well, you can only use it once.
Mhm.
And
A
so
lot of
people
misconceptions,
think,
a lot of myths.
yeah, so they're like, oh, I want to save it up so I can use it on, when it's
Yeah.
really important. Or
Yeah.
they think that, they've used it all up once they've bought something and that they can't maybe buy a second home
Right.
using the benefit or something like that. You want
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. There's three major myths, is that that it expires, you can only use it once, and that's it.
Yeah.
In fact, it's actually a lot better than that. There is no expiration date. So as soon as you become eligible while you're active duty, you can use it while you're active duty, and as you can transfer off active duty. Let's say you go into reserves, it doesn't matter. As long as you maintain eligibility, you have it for the rest of your life. I had a Vietnam veteran that served 4 years in the Navy, or sorry, in the Vietnam War, and he didn't use it until, for the first time, until like 4 years ago in his 70s.
Oh my
So
gosh.
he didn't even know about his VA home loan then. He just knew he was a veteran, and then I think he attended one of my classes because he was like, "Oh, what's his VA home loan thing?" I'm a veteran. I think I should probably know something about my benefits. And then he came to the
Yeah.
class, and that's how I was able to help him. So that's one aspect of it, and a lot of people do go about thinking that they can only use it while they're active duty, or expires after 10 years of within 10 years of them getting out. Some of those were true back in the day, like in the 70s, but it's not
Mm.
true anymore. Um, the other big one is, yeah, you mentioned that you can only have one at a time, or you only have a one-time use. You can actually rinse and recycle the VA home loan as many times for the rest of your life. Buy, sell, buy, sell. So I advise some of my active duty clients, if you're going to be in the military for 20 years, imagine buying and selling it every time you move. and then making potentially 10, 20 to $80,000 every time you buy and sell, which is amazing if you think about it.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
so
real
yeah, they
estate
can
is
keep
the
doing that.
great wealth builder.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah. So if they know how to use it the right way, they could really set themselves up. And I tell a lot of clients that when you first buy a house, if you do it the right way, and if it all works out, you could really set yourself up for 10 years if you know how to do it correctly.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, they can use it as many times as one. There's not a limit, and they can rinse and repeat it, rinse and recycle it for the rest of their lives. And then
yeah,
the last one is a very important piece. Um, but the main thing is they believe they can only have one VA loan at one time,
yeah,
which is not true. I also didn't know this until I actually tried it out on myself. I didn't know I could do it this way,
yeah.
but the VA home loan allows you to have multiple VA loans at one time. I've worked with some clients who've had 4 or 5 VA home loans actively right now. So
Wow.
you can kind of build a real estate portfolio in that manner if that's what you want to do, and that if that's is in line with the what your definition is of generational wealth.
Yeah,
So yeah, there's a lot of great benefits that you just got to know the rules, just like anything else. You just got to know the rules. You got to know how it works. Make sure you have the right team around you and be able to advise you in that way if that's the direction you want to go.
yeah.
Mhm.
You know, talking about being able to have multiple at once, that reminds me of, back when I first started my career, there were assumable VA loans out there,
Mhm.
and I think that there still are. I think it's kind of
Yeah,
come back
a little bit.
around.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know back then, it was always said, well, you're tying up that veteran's benefits. If somebody comes in and assumes that VA loan, that ties up that veteran's benefits, they can't use it on something else. Is that accurate? Is that an
Yes
accurate
and no.
assessment?
So it depends on who's assuming it. So anyone can assume it, even those who have not served in the military. But if someone that is also VA eligible can also assume a VA home loan, and it will transfer the entitlement to the veteran because they both have entitlement, right?
Right.
So it won't be tied up anymore if it's transferred to another veteran.
Okay.
If it's transferred to a non-veteran, then that's when it stays tied up. So in that case, it doesn't really make sense to go on market as
As
offer
an
assumable
assumable.
to someone that's as a not to a non-veteran. I do see it makes sense to, like, let's say it's a grandparent or a parent that wants to pass it down to their children because they have a
Mm,
2.25% interest rate, which makes total sense. I mean, with
right.
home affordability these days, I mean, why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is also another version of generational wealth. Um, so yeah, I would say yeah, it can get tied up. It depends on who is assuming the loan. But what's tough about the assumptions these days is that now that they're being more prevalent, it's actually quite tough to go through the assumption process.
Mm,
A lot of people like have been reaching out to me to start the assumption process, which I have nothing to do with it. It's not
yeah.
has nothing to do with the origination team. It has more to do with who services the loan, which means who you make your mortgage payment to. That's
Yeah.
how you start the process. And that process is, let's put it this way, they can do it, doesn't mean they're proficient at it.
Right.
So most people I've heard that are going through this process as a either as an agent or as a buyer, they have been saying it's been 3+ months for this
Yeah.
process to complete. And then the other question is what happens with the equity, or sorry, the difference in the purchase price and the assumption and the assumed loan. One of the things that we found out within the last 2 months is that you can potentially take out a second to cover
Mm,
some of the remaining. So for example, you have a $500,000 purchase price. The remaining assumed loan is $300,000. Now we have $200,000 to figure out, right?
right.
Well, no, there's not, I do not know of any seconds that will cover the entire remaining amount. There's just no way because it's
Right.
just a
Because
lot
they
of
want you to have 20% equity or something like that,
something
right?
like that, 10,
Yeah.
15% down
Yeah.
minimum. So they're not going to take out the whole amount. So you still have to come in some, just not as much as 200K. But the one thing that really makes getting a second on those assumables really almost near impossible is that that second also has to be assumable as well.
Oh. Oh,
Yeah, that's one of the things that
wow.
we learned from the VA. So I haven't found one that has an assumable clause in it.
Yeah.
Most seconds are not. So it's basically to the point where the most common answer is you have to have cash.
Yeah.
So, and that's how most of the people I know that have done assumptions. were doing it.
Yeah.
They were selling a house, made a bunch of equity, moved it forward.
Right. And trying to preserve that interest rate by, assuming,
Yeah,
yeah, they're
and
like,
then that's what's yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, it's not so much as a true VA loan in a sense, but it is does get you the rate. So
yeah,
it depends if
yeah,
you have that money or not.
yeah. It sounds like it's important to have, knowledgeable people advising you when you're
I
getting in
try.
that
Sometimes people don't
situation.
like the bad news I give them, but I just try to be straight up as much as I can and not waste anybody's time. But yeah, not
Yeah,
always the best answer sometimes.
yeah.
Hmm.
So we were just chatting a little bit before we went live here,
Yeah.
about that announcement that the VA came out
Yeah.
with. It came out as if it was a hard announcement where it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're
Spiked
going
a
to
lot of talk.
consider, is what I read. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
My thought is exactly what you said. It's a proposal and it's what they're thinking about. Nothing is set in stone. It literally states that we are as because they heard everything about the chat that happened in DC with NAR and advocacy that everyone had.
Yeah.
I forgot what that's called. That what was
Well,
the event
we were
again?
there for legislative days
Yeah,
in
I think it was
DC,
that.
and I was at the conference. I was there lobbying, and the thing that it's interesting to me that they came out with this announcement so quickly
Right.
after, because when I was there, like what I was hearing
Yeah.
from the people we were talking to and from NAR itself in some of the sessions was, yeah, you know, they hear us, but they're going to say they're going to do something, but they're really not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And
Well, they heard
then,
you.
yeah, and then that
Cool.
announcement came out and it was promoted as if, here we go, here's our
Right.
answer. And I'm like, is this them just pretending they're going to do something, or are they really going to do something?
I think what they heard and with the actual concerns is actually a good thing. The fact that he even made an announcement and said something official, and they even set up a date.
Yeah,
So to kind of get everyone up to speed, last week the VA department there's a deputy director somebody Karina or something like that. She basically announced that as Department of Veteran Affairs, we are going to consider potentially doing a temporary lift of and allow VA buyers to be able to pay for commissions. How that's going to happen, they have not announced. Like, there's no
yeah,
official thing that's put out as to how that's going to work. They just said by June 12th, we may consider putting out some kind of revision or some kind they usually call it circular, some kind of a temporary
mm,
ban or temporary lift of that, and then reconsider about putting something more permanent down the line.
okay,
Probably after July is my guess, which makes sense. Um, what they did not say is how they're going to do it and if it's actually done. So it's all a proposal. It's not something that's set in stone. It's just a discussion.
yeah,
But they heard you guys, which is really good, which is I thought was really important because yes, the idea is to protect veterans from overpaying. But the key thing is that if everyone is paying the buyer's agent commission, then they're not technically overpaying. They're just being they're just trying to we're just trying to get veterans to be just as competitive as any other buyer in the market so that they
yeah,
at least have a fighting chance of getting the piece of America that they earned. So
yeah,
I personally think that the what the VA said of them considering it is a great thing. It has been a point of contention for a long time as far as that commission stuff goes, especially back in 2019 when Washington had this talk about it as well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I think what I'm wondering is how they're going to go about it is like what are the ways that they're going to allow the veteran pay for the commissions for the buyer's
yeah,
agent? And I think if what I like to see is they do something similar to what Fannie and Freddie did, allowing conventional buyers. They did allow conventional buyers to pay for closing costs already, but they've made it a different rule where it's outside of the seller concessions limit, which is a really
right,
good thing. So
right,
they're like, oh, it's not going to be part of the seller concessions limit. It's going to be outside, no big deal. Which is, I
right,
think, it's a really good, a great adjustment.
right,
I hope VA does something similar. Technically, VA doesn't have a seller concessions limit, but they do have a limit on how we use those seller concessions toward pay debt payoff, which is
mm,
4%.
yeah,
So what I think is that one, they will allow for it, and maybe it's within the 4%, is my
mm,
guess. allowing it to be within the 4%, which means of the, let's say, for example, it's a $400,000 house. You somehow get $20,000 from the seller for seller concessions to
Mhm.
include the buyer's agent commission. That means up to $16,000 of that 20 grand can go toward seller commission and debt payoff,
Okay.
which 2% debt payoff is really not that bad.
Yeah,
So
that's not bad
that's
at
like
all.
$8,000 of debt payoff. So that's some people's credit card balances.
Yeah.
So and yeah, so I think if they're able to make some kind of adjustment to allow for it, allow it to be rolled in the purchase price, it should be fine. However, the other part of me thinks, well, it's no different what we're doing now.
Yeah.
It's just how we're wording it, you know? So it just
Yeah.
to me, it's kind of almost a silly conversation because it just comes back to going around doing the same thing as we have
Well,
always been doing.
this whole thing really is just a way of rewording
Maybe
it.
I
I
have too
mean,
much
really, the
common sense
buyer's
about this.
always
Maybe I'm
been, there's
simplifying.
one part of money, the pot
Yeah.
of money. There's always been one pot of money. The buyer's the one bringing that pot of money, and
Yeah.
there are costs associated with that transaction that get paid out of that pot of money. And it's
Yeah.
just a matter of putting it on that settlement statement
Yeah.
somewhere,
Yeah.
and like we're still dealing with that.
Yeah.
Um, in the interim, before we have any sort of actual resolution on that, um, heard I was at a session with Washington Realtors legal hotline lawyer Annie Fitzsimmons,
Okay. Yeah.
and she had a panel, a broker, a title officer, and a lender,
Yeah.
and they were talking about, we're at this intersection of the NAR settlement and the way we're doing business,
Right.
and the lender was talking about the possibility of, in this time right now, currently, like today, uh, being able to shift potentially, like if the buyer has this obligation to pay compensation to their representative, um, to their real estate agent, and the seller is unwilling to assist in paying that compensation, but the buyer is a VA buyer, so they're prohibited from having it
Sure.
appear on their side of the settlement statement. The suggestion from the lender that was there was, move some of the proposed to the seller to move some of the seller closing costs to the buyer side, and then move that compensation to the seller's side, like in equal amounts, so that that compensation still appears on the seller's side, but the buyer is
No, I think
footing.
no, I know exactly what he's talking about. And
Yeah, what do you
I
think?
remember one time that I told a client of mine they were trying to get this offer accepted, and I was like, here's something you could potentially offer, and this is totally up to you, is that you can offer to pay some of the seller's closing cost.
Hmm.
And its escrow fee itself is almost 1% on each side.
Yeah,
So maybe it's more like 1.5% split between the two sides, but that's like 0.7%. So there you go. There's one piece. So now you have maybe another 2% to figure out.
yeah,
Um, yeah, because the seller's closing cost is almost about 2%, roughly.
yeah,
And there's nothing against the VA client paying the seller closing costs. It just specifically there's only limitations in regards to how much the lender can charge in regards to the origination fee. And in
mhm,
addition to that, the buyer's agent commission. As far as what fees they're allowed to pay for and like title and escrow fees, there's really
mhm.
no limits. So I've had VA clients, some very rarely pay for the seller's a portion of the escrow fee, including theirs. So
Okay.
yeah, no, I think it's another great way of doing about it. But just if you look at the bottom line, to me, it's like it's all the same
It
still.
is.
So it's just the verbiage. It's just
Yep.
a different puzzle piece within the same whole picture still.
Yep.
So to me, it's just like wow. It's more of like now it's less about the annoyance of this. It's just trying to figure out how to comply with it to make it
Mhm.
work so that ends up being the same bottom line for everybody. Um, so yeah, I mean, to me, it's just so silly, but I understand that we got to make it work. We got to adapt with it. If you don't adapt,
Yeah.
then you're gonna not do well in this business.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it'll lead to some discussions that really help people understand what's going on in the transaction. Because in the
Yeah.
past, I guess a lot of those discussions haven't been happening. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think what I've talked to a lot of my lender buddies about is that they feel like this is like the realtor version of our 2008, of how everything happened with lenders, specifically loan officers,
Mhm.
specifically in 2008. You know, I obviously was, well after that, so I'm used to how things are now. But what I've heard from in the past was that, it was the compensations for loan officer was limitless, like boundless.
Yeah.
So and it was, based on the rate in some cases. And you know, with all of that, and the clients are being charged these absorbent amount of fees, and you just add it to the loan, and obviously you have
Mm.
overvalued houses and things like that. So to me, it's almost kind of a similar situation, where the compensation is basically being discussed more so than just like it was for loan officers.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, it's been extremely limited and brought down by a lot. So I think it's and the industry is still around. I mean, it just all I did was it took out it it basically filtered out the loan officers that were literally there for money for not good reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think it's a great thing. I'm a huge advocate of having these conversation and buyer representation agreements. I've never sold a house without one. I've been
right.
licensed since 1998. I remember when I moved here, and I don't know if it's just because of the brokerage. I was with such a high quality brokerage in Texas because I was.
You can say that. I mean, go ahead.
Or
You can say no problem.
but but there it was required of every agent that was associated with that brokerage that we use buyer representation agreements. So from 1998 forward, like I've always used
Yeah,
them.
just
And it
something
was
that,
really
yeah, just
baffling to me
that
when
people
I
aren't using
moved
it.
here almost
Yeah.
5 years ago and people weren't using them. So I'm really glad to see it. So yeah,
Yeah, it was more of like a recommendation. Now it's almost a requirement. So
well, it is. It's the
yeah.
law.
Yeah,
It's
it's
the
law
law
now. Yeah.
now. Yeah.
So yeah, I want to, as someone who's also been in the real estate industry and kind of seen everything and around, do you ever wonder if this had to do with just what it boils down to, what it sounds like to me is like maybe some agents out there are not able to have those hard conversations about compensation.
I have always found that reluctance to present a buyer's brokerage services agreement is a fear. That
Yeah.
it is the
Even
fear
on
on
the
the
seller
part of the
side.
agent. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
afraid to have that difficult conversation. And
Just
it,
breaking down numbers instead of like,
yeah,
because I can see how 2% sounds better than $8,000 from
yeah,
the sell price. Like if you're like a listing agent, you're trying to present numbers and kind of give a client an idea. Um, to tell a client like, oh yeah, about 7% of your costs will go toward selling your house, basically. And they're like, oh, 7% doesn't seem bad when you're looking at a 700,000 house, that's like $35,000. And
yeah.
you're like, and then when it comes down to it, they don't, I guess, I don't know when the settlement statement gets shown to them. It sounds like it's much later in the process, and that's when they're like, oh well, that's what I got to do.
Again, this is why it's so important to hire a good realtor because honestly, you should be when you're sitting down with your seller to get that listing agreement signed, you should have a net sheet so that they can
Yeah.
see what the expenses are and get an idea of what
Yeah.
they can expect to walk away with. And there's
Numbers wise,
really,
not like percentage, right? Like percentage and numbers
it,
wise, probably like showing everything.
yeah, you can go to, there are so many places you can go as a realtor to get that net sheet. You can call your title company and say, hey,
Right.
I have a listing appointment. I've already called you to do the pre-listing book for me to help me gather all this information. Can you throw in a net sheet in there?
That
Give
easy,
me,
huh?
this is my
Yeah.
high, medium, low. Can you just run it with three? And they'll do it happily, and then you've got
It's
it for
that
your
easy.
client.
You tell
Yeah,
me it's that easy. Just call
it's
somebody and they'll put it in net
yeah,
sheet.
yeah. You don't even have
That's
to do it.
wild. That's wild. Like
Yeah. So why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? But yeah, there's difficult
that's crazy.
conversations. If there's any consumers watching this, hire an agent
I
that's
mean,
not
they
afraid to
got
have
to know. I mean,
difficult conversations.
I I think what it boils down to is, from me, if we're just trying to bring it down to one word is transparency and
Yeah.
clear transparency, not just like, oh, it's 2%. No, it's like this is the dollar amount.
Yeah.
Because I mean, because what's tough, what I see with a lot of my clients who reach out to me and look to sell their house, I do put into numbers and I just state, I always expect about 8%, maybe 10 if you're paying for buyers closing costs. But that's about, if you're selling a $500,000 house, it's about 50 grand. So now you're down 450. What's 450 minus subtract out of your loan amount, and that's about
Yeah.
what you'll clear. And most of them, I don't, I just say that off the cuff, just kind of like give them an idea. But I I guess that's something that as kind of like lending professionals we had to get used to, was like having those harder conversations with numbers
Yep.
because they see them and the numbers are clear as day. Like we have something
Yeah.
called a loan estimate now,
Yeah.
and that comes at the very beginning of the transaction. They see it, and then so
Yeah.
um it's almost like we have to kind of prepare them to look at the
Yeah.
document that they have to receive by federal law.
Yep. Yep.
So but that's fascinating. So it's
Yeah.
kind of just interesting to see the why it happened, and then what's happening and what's going on with the industry. Is it a standard, or is it a um maybe it's a one-off thing? It sounds like it's almost in a sense kind of a little bit of both,
I think that
maybe.
there's a lot of, I mean, there's a wide range of people out there in the world practicing real estate. So, you know, you, I would, there is no standard, and there's a lot of different business models. There's a
Right,
lot of different ways to, skin the cat.
right.
But there's also a lot of people that are really sloppy in the way they conduct their business. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Man. And I guess as someone who is obviously been around and seen all sorts of people, like how if have you gotten to the part where you feel like you can just like notice those people right off the bat?
Um, with clients or
No,
with
just
other
with other
agents?
other agents, it's like this is not going to go well. Or you're going to have communication issues because they just want you to do all the work or some of that. I mean, I guess that's easier because they tell you what they want you to do. But
Yeah.
but yeah,
I think the biggest sign is, as a listing agent, when you get a contract from uh, a buyer agent that's written really sloppily, where it's clear that they themselves don't understand the forms based on the way they've completed them.
that's
You
awkward.
know that it's going to be a hard transaction,
Right.
and that in this market that we've had here, where so often, I mean, even today, it's not unusual to have multiple offers. Maybe we're not having 10 or 20 or 30 like we were a couple years ago, but it's not unusual to have two or three. Um, and when you have those two or three offers and you can sit down in front of your client and you can point out, the cleanly written one, the one where the agent was competent and understood the forms, and the one
Oh,
where the
wow.
agent didn't, like which one's gonna win?
Right.
I mean, yeah,
So I guess as a client, like as someone who doesn't fully understand real estate, how is that seen? Because some people just like, oh, I love this person's vibe and energy and all that stuff, but we're professionals.
yeah,
It has to be, in the concrete as to like what their level of literally, I mean, literally just professionalism. So I guess
yeah,
if you were a client knowing what you know, how would you describe someone who is competent and is or what are the signs of being someone being sloppy?
yeah. I would say, a consumer should want to have an agent that's going to sit down and talk to them before they ever, you know, step foot in a house or get in a car. Um, if you're calling people randomly off the internet to go see houses and they're willing to meet you
Right.
there and they're emailing you a brokerage services agreement for that one showing or whatever, their solution has been to the law that we have to have that before we provide brokerage services, whatever their solution is. And they're not sitting down and having those conversations with you
Like a consultation,
before.
like
Yeah,
initial
I mean, that's a
consultation.
huge sign. Like they're
Mhm.
not running their business like a professional. They are not a professional.
Yeah.
And you should
Just
find
a
another
hired
agent.
salesperson, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
That's a really good point. So basically, your recommendation for a lot of agents out there, especially being new or want to level up and be at a high level of professionalism, is meet with your client first, no matter listing or buying, and really sit down with
Always.
them and really educate them,
Yep.
talk with them about your services, talk about their goals, plans, all that stuff. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Hmm.
How are you going to be of service to them if you don't even know what they're really looking for?
Right. So basically, almost like a doctor intake, like your initial intake with the doctor.
Exactly.
You want to be like, okay, what do you want?
Exactly.
I
Yep.
want, I want plastic surgery. Okay, there's thousands of types
Yeah.
of that plastic surgery.
There's a
Well,
lot of stuff I need to know about you and your situation and your
mhm.
goals before I can, in a professional way, help you find a home.
Yeah, and
So,
asking the right questions, right? Because
yeah.
that's what it boils down to. Hmm.
Yep. Yep.
Interesting. I mean, as a loan officer, I want to make sure I'm also partnering with highly professional real estate agents, and I think the most common denominator is them sitting down and doing the consultation with their clients. Because I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I do the
Yeah.
consultation as well. I actually force them to do a consultation. I don't just give them, the pre-approval letter and say, "See ya." Just like you said, I want to know how I can help them best, and I
Yeah.
think the agents I really enjoy working with, the realtors one that I enjoy working with, is they do the exact same thing because it's a relationship at the end of the day.
Exactly. Well, and vice versa. Like, I don't want a pre-approval letter from somebody who's never met with or had a financial discussion with my client. I want to know
Right.
that whoever that person is has thoroughly vetted this client and that that pre-approval
Mhm.
letter is worth more than just the paper
Yeah.
or, the screenshot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's what's funny with, I think, what a lot of people don't know in both both the real estate industry and both in the consumer industry is that a pre-approval letter is not a law-abiding document. It
Nope.
really isn't. I can really write one on a piece of napkin and
Yeah.
there you go. There's a pre-approval letter.
Yeah.
So I guess, as you know, it probably just depends on, it obviously the competency and the reputation of that person that's giving the pre-approval letter, just like it is with the
Absolutely.
buyer's agency agreement
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Totally understand. That makes sense to me.
Well, this has been a great discussion, Lee.
Yeah, I dig it.
My time for our Zoom meeting is about up, so I'm gonna wrap it up now.
Oh
But
yeah, we have 3 minutes. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much
Thanks
for
for having me.
joining
This
me
was
today.
fun.
This was a great talk. I think it was the best one
Yeah.
yet.
Hopefully, I hope I made you look good. I made Kate look good. So that's all I'm trying to do here. So,
I
uh,
think you looked great, so that's all that we need.
I had a haircut yesterday. That's what happened. Yeah, that's all it was.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee. We'll
All
talk
right.
soon.
Thanks, Lori. Sounds good.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Bye.